We're gonna get going. So, hello to all of our panelists and our attendees. Thank you for joining us today. This is Canceling Female Fertility: How Campus Culture Devalues Women by Devaluing Motherhood, hosted by us, Feminists Choosing Life of New York. We are a New York State human rights coalition. We promote pro-life feminism and the consistent life ethic. So, we are opposed to abortion, unjust war, the death penalty, and assisted suicide. We believe in that consistent ethic of life. And so joining us today is Dr. Alicia Chase from SUNY Brockport and one of our board members, and also Dr. Sarah Hamersma from Syracuse University. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and then we'll get started with the first question.
Hi, I'm Dr. Alisia Chase. I am, as Sarah said, a board member of Feminists Choosing Life of New York, and I am also a full-time art historian. I've been the only sole art historian with tenure at SUNY Brockport for now going on 23 years.
And I'm Sarah Hamersma. I'm at Syracuse University in the Department of Public Administration and International Affairs. I'm an economist by training, and I study public programs mostly related to anti-poverty efforts. And I have a particular interest in moms and babies.
Awesome, thank you guys. So to get us started with canceling female fertility and everything that we're going to get talking about, Alicia, can you get us started and set the scene and kind of tell us why and how canceling female fertility is happening on the college campuses and how did we get here?
Certainly. I would like to make the disclaimer, at least for myself, but I'm assuming for Sarah as well, that we are speaking out of our own convictions personally, and we are not speaking for our employers. It's just
Correct.
something that I think is important for us to clarify before we begin. So today, as a young woman, I mean, I have Sarah P. to attest to this in our conversations. You go off to college, and on the majority of campuses, you encounter female fertility only as a problem to be solved. Everywhere you go on campus, every health fair, every bulletin board, the bathroom stalls are the worst. They're papered with flyers telling you where you can get the morning after pill or where to procure abortion, surgical abortion services, but really nothing about what to do if you're pregnant and you want to keep your baby. I would say it's a culture that presumes some form of abortion is inevitable. And I would also posit that it's not just student pregnancy that's stigmatized, but also faculty pregnancy. Speaking from my own experience, when I came to Brockport 23 years ago, I was 4 months pregnant and I had a 2.5-year-old. And when I walked on campus, the female dean who had hired me looked at me and said, you haven't told us about this. And being young and impressionable and terrified that I would not be able to keep this job, which was the one salary job our family had, I acquiesced to a lot of her demands. And in retrospect, they were pretty unfair legally, but I think it's here I am essentializing women and myself. Maybe it was just my own low self-esteem, but I think statistics do suggest that when it comes to negotiating salary in situations like maternity leave, women aren't so good at sticking up for themselves, which is one of the reasons I'm involved in the work with FCLNY that I am right now. Then, with the day I had the baby, one of my dear colleagues, who was wonderful to my children and to me throughout her time in our department, looked at me, well, I'm holding Astrid, and says, now, Alicia, you're not going to have another baby, are you? Because you have to get tenure. And it killed my new motherhood buzz and set me in that kind of anxiety that I feel like a lot of my female colleagues of childbearing age on campuses have felt. So what I'm going to do before Sarah tells us her take on the situation is, as I've been part of the Women's Studies Department at Brockport for the 20 years of its existence, and I helped found it, I'm going to kind of give an overview of why I feel we're in the place we are. And the antinatalism is most profound, I would argue, in those Women's Studies Department. But PC culture has kind of dictated that those agenda setters in departments like Women's Studies and Gender Studies become the kind of operating methodology for the entire campus. So again, this is my opinion, but regarding motherhood, I think the academic disregard for it is a distinctly Marxist phenomenon. William Reich, who was a German theorist writing in the 1930s, wrote two books. He was watching Nazi Germany. He was in Germany. He was watching Hitler's rise to power, and he wrote two books. He wrote The Sexual Revolution, and he wrote another text called The Mass Psychology of Fascism. Now, he wrote those in the 30s, but they weren't published in America until the close of World War II. The Sexual Revolution, which a lot of feminists were very influenced by. In fact, Kate Millett took a lot of her training from him, that sexual revolution would free women and set them on the path to equality. But not as many people know the mass psychology of fascism. So they were published in succession, 45 and 46. And I'd like to really talk about what the mass psychology of fascism as a text did to academia. It posited that the nuclear family was directly equated with authoritarian rule, right? That the father who earned the money and the stay-at-home mother who depended on him was the seed of fascism, right? Or the seeds of fascism. And traditional gender norms were thus viewed as dangerous, not just retrograde. So post-World War II, academics really began to latch onto this idea wholesale. Now, the greatest irony about this is all contemporary data and statistics basically show us that children who grew up in two-family, intact marriages, two-parent home with an intact marriage are the most psychologically healthy and successful children. So you'd think this would be, right, the student that our faculty would want to teach. Doesn't that sound ideal? You have, an emotionally stable, psychologically stable, secure child and ready to open their mind. But no, intellectuals began to pathologize the family, to see it as an aberration. And since families come from female fertility starts to begin to be seen as a problem to be solved, right? So Reich also believed that women's sexual repression was part of this problem, a determining cofactor. And he argued that if women put their sexual needs ahead of their maternal instincts, then there would be peace in the world. Now, I'm not exaggerating on this. I have a quote from him here. He says, quote, "Sexually awakened women, affirmed and recognized as such, will mean a complete collapse of the authoritarian ideology." And that's from the mass psychology of fascism. So you see that, setting in right after World War II is this belief that women's sexual liberation is viewed as a necessary precondition for peace around the world. Here at home, it's not just German theorists who've experienced the horrors of the war and the Holocaust, but right here at home, you have Betty Friedan's 1963 pop sociology text, The Feminine Mystique, that so many feminists were influenced by. And if you've ever read it, it feeds right into this idea. She even insinuates at one point that the domestic space, a woman's home, is her prison, is no better than her prison. And again, a lot of women bought into this. Women love the promise of liberation, as any human does. It's, one of our innate kind of challenges we try to solve to overcome desire, right? And to live more noble lives. But Friedan also, we kind of forget that Friedan had whole sections of that text on how colleges fed into what she called a feminized education. The old joke about women went to college to get not an MFA or an MA or a BFA or a BA or a BS, but they went to get an MRS, a degree in becoming a housewife, that their whole goal in going to college was to find a suitable husband. Now, I have proof of how close to home this is. When I was researching for this talk, I started thinking about the College of Human Ecology at Cornell, right down the road here in upstate New York. And I started thinking about when they might have changed their name from the College of Home Economics, to this new title of Human Ecology. And sure enough, it was 1969. And I'd like to share my screen here and show you the first syllabus for the first women's studies course ever at the newly named College of Human Ecology. Let me see here. Sarah, you have to let me share. Okay, so let's see. Just trying to get it up so you can see the whole thing better. All right, so there is the first syllabus, typed on a typewriter, called The Evolution of the Female Personality, the first class dedicated solely to the psyche, biology, and goals and dreams of women. And if you look at it, there's a lot about the status of women in the contemporary, United States and around the world at that time. There's one course period dedicated to marriage on February 12th. There's a good portion dedicated to history, a good month's worth of women around the world. And the image of women, as an art historian, I can tell you that that's a rightful, topic of interest, because as many, many feminist scholars have illustrated, we have largely been oppressed on the basis of what people think women are and the images that are portrayed throughout art history and media because of that. And of course, they rightfully work in Playboy and Vogue right there. But what I'd like to draw your attention towards is at the very end of the syllabus, it says prospects for change, right? And this heavy emphasis on psychologists, psychoanalysis as a way to tell women what they need, rather than to trust their own intuition and to look back in history as perhaps potential moments of good things about being a woman. They also have right here on the penultimate class, prospects for androgyny, a society with no sex differences. And it seems to be that that's kind of the ultimate goal here. So I found that completely revealing, because that fits right in there with this idea that women, according to Friedan and to Reich, were either supposed to be completely sexually emancipated, but to give up any of the traditional roles associated with being a woman. And I have one more thing I'd like to talk about that I think comes into, two things, obviously, given that we are a pro-life organization. But first thing to remember is that it isn't until the late 1960s and 70s that the majority of colleges become coeducational. So that's something that really changes things. And then there were always co-educational colleges from about 1835 on, but the 60s and the 70s are when the real push is. And then we get Title IX, which makes discrimination against women in education illegal. Now that comes into effect in 1972. And this is particularly, beneficial for women who want to work in academia, because it makes discrimination in terms of hiring illegal. And so we also have not only more female students entering coeducational institutions, but we have far more women teaching. So the first wave of female academics who come into academia are coming in with this kind of training that Reich and Friedan have infiltrated pop culture with. Simultaneously, or almost simultaneously for our purposes, we have in 1973, of course, Roe v. Wade. And the moment that abortion, right, the constitutional right to abortion is seen as law, I think much of the United States general populace, well, maybe half at that time. I don't really have data statistics on who was favor at that time, but these began to be seen as kind of the twin cornerstones of women's liberation, right? Title IX and Roe v. Wade. And I think that leads to where we are today. And I just want to say one more thing. It's terribly ironic that colleges are constantly bemoaning their low enrollment numbers without recognizing that the dearth of students they're experiencing is directly due to abortion on demand being legalized, right? So I did some digging with Live Action, and according to their statistics, of the 63 million babies lost to abortion since 1973. Gen Z has lost, the Zoomers have lost more than 26 million. Prior to that, the millennials lost 24.5. And Dr. Hamersma's and my own generation, Gen X, lost 8.7 million in those initial 7 years from 73 to 80. So now, if these were the statistics of a war, if those were such staggering, casualties were part of a war, there'd be an uproar from all sides. I guess you could argue that it is a war, but I'm constantly reminded when I was preparing for this webinar of the phrase from the French Revolution that says, the revolution eventually eats its own children. And I mean, I think we're at that point. So that's what I've got. And
Mhm.
All
Yeah.
right, Dr. Sarah, the next question is for you. So, Alicia set the scene for us. She told us why this is important, the grave matter that we're in.
Mhm.
This attitude about canceling female fertility, is it propagated mostly by students, by the institution, or both? What are the factors at play here?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. So I don't have the historical expertise, but I've been on college campuses since I was 18. So for 30 years now, I've never left a college campus. And for 25 of those years, I've been at a large research university. And so three different ones. Um, my sense is that students come into campuses, uh, especially undergraduate students, not seeing college as a place where one would ever have a child. Simply wouldn't happen. There's a very dichotomous understanding of like children are either later or not at all. Um, and and I think they have the notion that in a sense what a child would do is derail. So the child's role, any role they can imagine, is a negative role. The child derails the plan. The child interrupts the plan. Pregnancy is pathologized as not being a natural or even exciting part of life, but as something to be very extremely avoided by many means, and in fact, um, something of a right that one has to avoid pregnancy, thought of as simply one has the right to not have any children and to do whatever they want to in terms of sexual behavior, but they have the right to not be pregnant. I think they've come in with that view. Um, but the institution does nothing to to dissuade that view. The institutions are not set up in general to be supportive of students who are parenting. The institutions are set up to essentially require students to be available on demand for different kinds of jobs, for their coursework. There isn't a ton of flexibility built in for family life. And so the goals of the institution for a person to get out and get their degree are very aligned with the notion that having children would be an interruption. It would make the job of the university more difficult as well in terms of producing graduates. Um, I want to say a little bit also, though, about not just the students, but the other people on a campus. So there are many long-term employees on college campuses, including lots of staff who work in anything from physical plant to IT to administrative offices um, to faculty and many different kinds of teachers across departments with different levels of job security and so on. Um, in general, universities are known to be fairly poor for parental leave. Um, one of the universities I was at was doing an experimental pilot program where they allowed someone to take one semester, and it was actually externally funded by some granting organization that was trying to help schools that were performing very poorly to do better with women. And so I like to think it's very strange. They got a grant for being very bad at something.
mm,
Um, uh, the before that program was in place, I talked to a pregnant faculty member, and her department had been so kind as to say that she could take the semester off from teaching and just do all her teaching in the semester after, as if somehow that would be feasible for a brand new mom. So universities are not known for great parental leave. As far as graduate students go, who are often well into fertility age and maybe ready to start a family, uh, they typically don't have any parental leave. I was recently um, in a meeting where parental leave was discussed, and some of the concerns that the university expressed were that if two graduate students were married to one another, they might actually each take a leave when a child is born, and that seemed somehow very problematic. Thankfully, several others in the room, including myself, pointed out that this is actually a really reasonable and a good thing, and that if that spouse were employed elsewhere, they would qualify for leave. And so having a leave for each parent is perfectly reasonable. But it really, to me, revealed the undergirded sort of the depth of that commitment to not giving up too much to try to support students who are parenting. Um, in terms of faculty, I also want to note there have been policies. I'm an economist, so I think a lot about policy analysis. There's actually been policies that are supposed to help parents be able to maintain their academic jobs by giving them what's called a delayed tenure clock, which means when their performance is assessed, they get some extra time to complete their publications and so on. And what's been found is that those delays actually only help men. And they help men because men take the delay, but they actually don't do most of the direct caregiving. Whereas when women take the delay, they spend that time caregiving. And so when it comes to comparing everyone's records at the time of tenure, the women still seem to come up short. And so these small attempts that have been made for equity have either not done much or have actually backfired. Um, and so our campuses continue to be a place where having a child is sort of something that someone uh, tries to ask politely for a bit of accommodation, tries to avoid making anything too complicated for anyone else. And just as Alicia described, where people are just not in an empowered position to say this is a wonderful thing. Uh, Pregnancy and birth are a capability that women have, not a disability, and they are something to be celebrated. Uh, and a job ought to work around that rather than the other way around.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sarah. For the next question, I'll give it to both of you guys. You both can give your thoughts on this, but what are some myths currently driving the fear of pregnancy for women on campus? Beyond what you've already said. And in contrast, what are some real barriers to motherhood that young women are facing in society? And how are these creating a culture on campus that is inhospitable to children? Alicia, do you want to go first since Dr. Sarah just spoke?
Well, I think that in terms of myth, the myths around there's a lot of myths around the female body on college campuses right now, and these both spring up out of Freudian psychoanalysis. There's a theorist called Jacques Derrida, who another '60s academic who terms a coined deconstruction for the way that academics analyze a text. And I've been thinking about that term a lot recently because when we had the art exhibition at Feminists Choosing Life last fall, I kept thinking about how different the term procreation is from deconstruction. And if you think that all the academics of the last 50 years have been trained to deconstruct things, right, which basically posits that there's no truth. There is no world of ideal forms, as Plato posited. There is nothing, there's no tradition, there are no eternal kind of values that we can pass on. Again, it was this idea that you rip the text apart and you demonstrate that it's a complete social construction. Well, as we know, French scholars, feminist scholars like Simone de Beauvoir said that was true of woman. Her famous line is, one is not born a woman, one is made into one, or one becomes one. That's the verb she uses. One becomes one, suggesting that it's only culture and society that determines what a woman is. And as a result, particularly women's studies and gender studies professors, and on our campus, I'm sure it's true at Sarah's campus, because every progressive campus in the world usually folds in a gen ed requirement that entails a course on women or on gender, because it's such a hot topic. And so these scholars are passing on to these young women the idea that any natural inclination that they have, any desire they might have to be a mother is unnatural, right? And if you're a professor like myself who wants to talk to her female students about babies, and just the other day I had a student email me telling me that she wanted to take the week off because her sister had had a baby and she was her sister's only source of support. And of course I wrote back, yay, tell her congratulations. Of course, I'll put my lectures online for you in a folder at the bottom of the course online site. And she said, this is the only positive response that I've gotten from my faculty. And so they don't even believe that in their own instincts. They're taught to mistrust their own instincts. And again, I'm gonna say something that, it's their own phrase. It's, ironically, it's their own phrase. One of the beloved feminist phrases of the past 40 years is, don't obey the commands of your oppressors. But it seems to me that a lot of feminist scholars have obeyed the commands of their masculine oppressors, from the preceding years of history, and they see the female body as something that's a burden rather than, as Dr. Sarah said, something miraculous with its own capabilities and abilities, that brings all life into the world.
Yeah, I think the this the myth that I see most strongly is something that I think is also in a sense kind of ironic, and that is that pregnancy is a personal choice that is a dangerous personal choice, and if one decides to do it, that's on them. In other words, this turns around sort of my body, my choice, and says, your baby, your problem.
Yep.
If you don't have to have babies, so if you do, that's on you. You should deal with all of it. There's no social support. There's no not social support in the sense of just kindness and accommodation, but even in financial ways. There's just very little support. And I think there's some myth about dangers, in the sense that I do get the sense that young women actually see pregnancy, if they were to compare statistics across many different medical issues, sources of potential accidents, risks of various things, I think they would be surprised that pregnancy is less risky than what they're seeing in the media, what they're being presented with. That doesn't mean there isn't any risk. I don't want to deny that. And I think one of the things that is not a myth is that we've got huge socioeconomic and racial gaps in maternal outcomes. And that is something that I think absolutely everyone in the pro-life movement and our friends across the way all need to come together and be very concerned about maternal mortality and essentially women's treatment in our medical establishments. So there's a lot to be truly concerned about there. At the same time, pregnancy is a normal reproductive act of an entire species. It's not a disease that kills some huge fraction of those who become pregnant. It is not, in fact, a medical emergency in and of itself. What I think some of the real barriers are actually identified by women who are interviewed after abortion when they're asked, why did you decide to get an abortion? We actually don't see them saying, I was really scared of the medical consequences of being pregnant. That is not a top or even near the top of the list. What's at the top of the list is financial constraints
Mm-hmm.
and relational challenges. In other words, a lack of support of both necessary kinds, financial and relational support. What that means is there are some government opportunities to create a stronger safety net, to create parental leave, and so on. And there are also some potential government actions related to the accountability of fathers. If we could point to that as another real deficit in the current situation, particularly with the attempts of so many years of feminism. The fact that men can still walk away with almost no accountability is really shocking, and continues to be the case. Um, the federal government can't do everything, though. We actually have to work to continue to understand what our social lives and our communities can do. I think of everything from like a kid who's crying in a restaurant and people giving them the
Mhm.
side eye, to a baby on a plane and people thinking, well, I have the right to be on this plane without a baby. I didn't have a baby. I shouldn't have to deal with the consequences of a baby. Not recognizing, of course, that baby is going to be literally paying your Social Security check, not figuratively, literally, because Social Security is paid by the current generation to the older generation. It is not put away in an account. It is a real-time transaction, and so without young people, there is no Social Security. So even for very practical reasons, I think one of the myths is that you can sort of choose. A whole bunch of people can choose not to have children, and everything will work out fine later. But we need children in order to perpetuate the species. It's a very strange thing to say, but whenever you look at a child and you're annoyed or frustrated, you got to remind yourself that you were that kid. Every single one of us was a kid who needed care, who was a distraction and created disturbances of all manner. And you know what? That's what kids do. They're supposed to do that. That's their job. And it's our job to take care of them. And then they will be the next generation who supports us. The last thing I want to note is just in my role as an economist, I sometimes feel like I have some different language around this that might be helpful. And that is um, when we think about what people spend their time and money on, um, we often think about goods and services. I think a way of thinking about the current view towards children is that children are a consumption good. They are something you can choose to purchase with your time and your money, and they're treated as a private good in the same way that you might decide whether to get a house, whether to get a dog, or whether to invest in some other way. And so this consumption good mentality doesn't recognize the production value of that child. Not only will they be productive later on, but they actually produce a lot of joy. They produce a lot of what we call utility, which is just well-being. They produce a lot from the very beginning. And by sort of framing things in this strict consumption good framework, we make it seem as if the child is a burden and not a contribution.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah. Alicia, do you have anything else to add?
Um, well, I loved that last point of Sarah's about the child being a burden. And this is anecdotal, but I think that anecdotes are often a better example of real world, instances than data and statistics, which can be manipulated any way, the user wishes to manipulate them. But I think college campuses are actually starved for children. I know that we have a daycare on campus, and whenever the little chain of eight, 3-year-olds is toddling along, all holding onto that rope, you can see predominantly female students coo and point and come over and say hi, how are you, and it kind of lightens the atmosphere. And I know that when I was a young mother, I was in an art department, so there was a lot of kind of a pretty lax attitude towards hierarchies. And when I would bring the kids to events like the art openings, my students loved having them there. And it goes both ways. I've told both Sarahs this story before, but when my daughter Astrid was about 4, she went to the campus daycare and they called me and they said she's sick. And I went over to get her and she wasn't sick. She just had a little bit of a fever. So I brought her to my classroom and the class was women in art. So 90% of the class was female students. And I sat her in the back and she watched them with these big eyes. And the next day she came down and it was the middle of March, as cold as it is out today. And she had flip-flops and she had painted her toenails. And I looked at her and I said, you should put on some sneakers. It's pretty cold outside. And she said, all your students had flip-flops on, Mom. And they painted toenails. So while she sat in that room, because college girls, as soon as it goes over 60 degrees one day, late February, March, they've got the flip-flops and the shorts and the painted toenails out for spring break. And I realized that she had sat there, gaga-eyed over these older women that she knew weren't quite mothers yet themselves, but who had paid her a lot of attention at the end of class. And it's those kinds of moments of real life, right, that campuses really neglect. I think they've been overly bureaucratized in a way that I don't want to return to the, kind of Hollywood version of Animal House, but um, there's a sense of losing a little bit of just humanistic chaos. Big dogs from fraternity houses sitting in the lecture room behind you. Professors that I had, male professors, who would come in the 80s with their baby Bjorns, and they'd have a toddler and their baby Bjorn. And we loved seeing that because it humanized our professors, and I think we've lost a lot of that. So I think it's a real climate problem, the entire campus climate and the policies that have ensued as a result of it have just created a kind of phobia, an antinatalist phobia, and a phobia.
Alicia, you mentioned that it hurts the demographics of the campus. Can you go into that a tiny bit more?
Well, I've sat in countless, autumn convocations where my president and my provost talk about the numbers, and we've actually been pretty fortunate at Brockport, but we've had to bring in a lot of students from downstate in order to keep the enrollment where it was naturally based on regional demographics for the last 20 years. We've had to really go beyond our normal student poll. And I would say it's accountable towards two things. One, as I already suggested by the Live Aid numbers, that, abortion has taken out an entire portion of these generations' peers who would otherwise be in college. I mean, I always think when I hear young people say they can't find a boyfriend or a girlfriend, I very macabrely think, and I'm sorry to say it, but half of them are dead. I mean, there just isn't the population there. And the other problem, of course, is, as Sarah alluded to, they don't make it easy for graduate students or faculty to have babies on a timeline that corresponds to obtaining their degree. So, if you start your graduate work at the end, let's say 24, 25, and even that, in some ways that's early because you haven't really become a full-fledged person there. And, sometimes a few years between undergraduate and going back to grad school is the best thing for you. Well, in our current, marriage dating climate, if you go back to get your graduate degree at 28 years old and your PhD is going to take you 4 to 5 years, those are some of your prime childbearing years, then you waylay that till you get a job. And then you've got that 7 year tenure clock. And you've got a colleague like mine who says, don't have another baby. You've got to get tenure, which means publish or perish, right? And research and publishing takes a lot of time away from your children. And it's just an absolute delay, 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 till the point where you do end up with a pretty low number of faculty who actually even have children anymore.
Dr. Sarah, do you want to expand on that?
Well, I
Or
think it's a broader issue, but I know that we promised our audience we'd have some solutions. So I was hoping we could get to that because I'm getting a little depressed.
yeah, no, definitely. What would it look like for the college campuses to bring back a love for life and accommodations to women and parents in general? What would this look like? Alicia, do you want to go?
Sarah, do you want me to talk about the Guadalupe Project first,
Yeah,
and then you can
absolutely.
expand on that?
Yeah.
So, I will start crying because I cry every time I talk about it. But so my son went to Catholic University, he was in the architecture program, and he and his girlfriend were home one Thanksgiving, and she was looking at her phone and she said, Angus, Anna had her baby. And, nosy mother in the kitchen, I came out and I said, who is Anna? And they both had these big smiles on their faces. They were looking at the photos of the couple, their college peers who had just had the baby in Washington, D.C. And his girlfriend looked at me and she said, "Oh, there are a couple that started dating last spring and they got pregnant and they were really worried because architecture is such a tough program that they were going to have to drop out or, you know, and maybe have an abortion or something." But the college really rallied behind them. We have something called the Guadalupe Project. So again, I'm going to share my screen here and show it to everyone in the webinar. And this is probably when I'll start crying. Can you see that now there?
Yep.
Okay. So now, remember, keep in mind that this is a Catholic college, but I just think the reassurance that they give students here, imagine being pregnant on a contemporary college campus and going to, for example, a SUNY campus where when you go to look up accommodations for pregnant students, you basically find clinical, medicalized language that pathologizes your pregnancy and says, you can apply for 6 weeks of maternity leave, or, you can get special accommodations to go to doctor's visits while you are pregnant, but basically sees it as a sickness. And I want you to think about that kind of language compared to what we see here, right? So building a culture of radical welcome for moms, dads, and babies at Catholic University. On the facade of our campus's oldest building, Caldwell Hall, are the words of our university motto, Deus lux mea est, God is my light. These words remind us that we are loved by God and that each one of us possesses incalculable worth as the light of God shines in and through us. They recall something else as well. Illuminated by this divine light, we are called to let it shine before others. Just south of University Mall, we find a bookend to the words Deus lux mea est. There sits Angels Unaware, a sculpture of 140 refugees on a skiff headed towards an uncertain future and hoping for a better life. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen this sculpture, but take a minute after the webinar and look it up because it's just absolutely phenomenal, close to life size. And there's actually a cast of it at the Vatican right now as well. And it has, as it says, 140 people from all ages and ethnicities on this skiff looking for, a refuge. This sculpture reminds us that the light we receive is also a gift we are called to give, especially to those facing challenging circumstances. By offering our love and support to those who need it, our actions testify to the dignity of all human life. And I love this statement because it calls out the kind of hypocrisy of college campuses where there's a lot of lip service to, welcoming the stranger, welcoming the refugee, but not welcoming actual life that might be impending by their students. So the Catholic University is committed to making our university a community illuminated by the divine light, a place of radical welcome for all, especially those in need. Today, we focus on extending the hand of loving welcome to mothers in our community, no matter their circumstances, to children and to fathers. Abortion is a tragedy. As our nation has been reminded in recent months, it is also among the most difficult topics to grapple with as a community. During a time of intense public conversation and tension about this issue, our response should be the way of love, focused on how to best support mothers, fathers, and children on our campus, in our nation, and in the church. And if you go down and it goes on and it talks about why they named it what they did. And if you go down and you click on, actually, maybe it's in a previous section, but there's a whole section, as you can see here, obviously how to get academic and other accommodations. But there is, caring for your baby, the helpful staff, pregnancy support, resources for faculty and staff who are pregnant, resources for men. I mean, that's just a radical thing in this day and age when, pop culture, bro culture, basically has dumped the problem of what Erica Bakioki calls, reproductive asymmetry in the laps of women because it is our bodies that bear the, results of a sexual encounter, whether it be lovemaking or a one-night stand. This Guadalupe project says, you're part of this. They don't say man up per se, but they offer a kind, firm, guiding hand and other faculty who have been fathers, who are fathers themselves. So I just look at this project and I wish that we could start implementing it on campuses around the country. It would just begin to change so much.
I think this is just a beautiful example and something that even universities that don't come from a religious persuasion could learn a lot from. As you said, the vision of welcoming, the vision of embracing, and allowing for and encouraging everyone's path means this path should be one that is also supported and encouraged in the same way that others are. Um, I wanted to say a couple things about being at secular large universities, where I think that there are also things that can be done that are not at such a high level of creating a program or being able to convince an administration to start something. And that is, I think a lot of our issues are really around the climate and culture of children. And so some of these things are as simple as, before class starts, maybe I show a picture of my dog or of one of my kids. My son was dressed up as a Jedi the other day, so I show a picture of both of them, my dog and my son. Um, Sometimes it is kids coming to class. Mine are older, so it doesn't happen as much as it used to when I would be in a bind and have to put them along. Um, but so some of this is just normalizing over and
Mhm.
over again and humanizing those kids. Um,
Rehumanizing, exactly.
exactly, rehumanizing the kids. I think we can advocate hard for parental leave, and a parental leave that's real. So I was at one point in a conversation where parental leave was discussed, but in the same breath, and this was for graduate students, in the same breath was, but without any delay in program completion. And I said, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Are you saying that there's a leave or that there's not a
So
leave?
absurd.
Because if there's not a leave, that's the only way that they wouldn't. In other words, they considered the delay in graduation again to be a problem rather
Yeah.
than a solution, right? Delaying the graduation is the solution, not the problem. Um, and so I think pushing hard to make sure that our students have access to leave that's real and that they don't have advisors breathing down their necks or anything else to get work done. I've talked to students who've had a lot of different experiences with different advisors around being a pregnant student, and some of the stories are great and some of them are really not. Um, the other thing I think we can do to influence the culture is wherever you have a role, and especially if you can take on a leadership role. I'll give an example. I was leader for the PhD program. I was the faculty director for 4 years. And one of the things I did was start a newsletter, just once a semester, a newsletter. And one of my goals with this newsletter was that it would not just be a bunch of bragging about publications and conferences, which it absolutely also was, because that's great stuff. But it was also about what's going on with people. And so I was begging people for their wedding photos if they got married, and I was absolutely all about the babies. And I would tell the students, we would get a newsletter out, there'd be a new baby, and I'd be like, the next newsletter, I want another baby. I don't know where this baby's going to come from, but we need babies for our newsletter. And it became almost just kind of a joke of how I just was kind of obsessed with trying to find these, let's get going here, people. Like we need some babies and at least some weddings if we can't get any babies for the next newsletter. Um, what this did was it sort of just set the tone that these are really important and exciting things that need to be shared and celebrated. Um, and I think a couple of other ways that this has come through those experiences as the PhD director are it sets students up to know that I, as the director, would be supportive if they wanted to be helpful to their colleagues. And so I had
Right.
students contact me about a picnic that we were going to be having anyway, and to say, what would it be okay if a bunch of us like went in together and sort of put together a baby shower that we could do alongside the picnic as a surprise? And like, do you want to contribute to the gift? And like, absolutely, this is such a great idea. It's opening up the space for other people to celebrate and to feel comfortable with that and to not think that it's odd or something that they should, sort of speak about in hushed tones. Um, the last thing I'll say that we can do is I just have a particular heart for the challenges of some of our international students who are parents.
Mhm.
Sometimes their spouse is a continent away, I've had students in some cases have their babies go back to their country of origin to be raised temporarily by their parents or their in-laws. Some have had their child with them, but their spouse is gone and they don't have the support that they typically would. Particularly culturally, having that parental support nearby is really, I mean, good for all of us. Very rare in the US context, but certainly my mom lives here now partly as a support for us, and I know that we would not have anything like the life we do without her here.
Mhm.
Um, so figuring out what do we do to make sure that these students are supported and that they're not put in a position to say, well, it's just impossible to keep my baby with me. And so the only options I have involve being separated from my child. What can we do so that that last resort doesn't have to happen? And I've had students who decided to move abroad with their child and try to finish at a distance, which is always a real challenge. But also, we can be the one who says it's not crazy for you to prioritize the well-being of your child. And if
That's
things
right.
are going to be best for your child, if all of you are together far away, then separated, then that's a good decision. Um, uh, Students who've been in that position have not been told that that's a good decision. They've been told that they're giving up. And that breaks my heart. That is the last thing that they're doing is giving up. They are actually prioritizing their child. They're sacrificing something about their original plans and finding a way to make things work in a different way so that they don't feel that they have to be separated from their child. And if if that's if there's anything we can do to support them to make sure that they're encouraged and supported, whether they're here with a child and need more support or whether they need to work somewhere else and we need to make sure to keep them in our community, even so, that's something that just means really a lot to me. And I think a lot of our students are struggling.
Yeah, and to tack on to that, golly, I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but I think one of the ways we could just do this very basically is to remember that, faculty have a 9-month contract, and our job was never meant to be 9 to 5, 5 days a week, 40 hours a week. And somewhere in the last 20 years, that's really become a kind of tacit understanding. And salaries haven't raised to match that, given the advanced degrees that faculty have and the debt that they've taken on and the time they've dedicated to their passion. I mean, lawyers manage their own time, and somehow there's been a lot of pressure, and I think particularly on female faculty who tend to be do-gooders. Women tend, the statistics that show that women will work harder for less pay. And, if you have unmarried colleagues without families or colleagues who are married without families and they aren't leaving for a soccer game and they aren't leaving for a lacrosse game, it's really easy to feel like you're somehow shirking your duties. And I think there needs to be a reassertion that if your students are happy and you're meeting all of your markers, what you do with your private time, as long as you're showing up when you need to, is the way you've chosen to craft your life. I mean, I had a lot of times where, I'd sit in my office. Oh, how often, Sarah, have you sat in your office waiting for a student to come during office hours? And nobody comes. Nobody comes.
Yep.
Especially now with email. You can answer emails from home. You can have a Zoom meeting. There's so many ways to be a present professor in this day and age and give time and presence to your family, particularly young ones. If you have toddlers and they're just sitting there playing with blocks, you can grade your papers online at home. You can have a 15-minute meeting with a student via Zoom. And so I think we also just need to, on campuses, if you're a faculty member, you need to push back on that. If you're a faculty member who wants to have a child, don't feed into that kind of insane American capitalist workplace mentality, because yours was supposed to be the profession that gave you the flexibility and reflection and downtime to then do some really creative problem solving. And being with your family is, what did Joseph Pieper say, the Catholic philosopher who talked about the fact that leisure was not supposed to be you go to the amusement park. It was supposed to be the down, quiet time where you're with the people you love and you're, letting all those things you've read about and all those observations you've made in the lab and all of those experiments that you've undertaken cohere into, the groundbreaking research you'll later write up. But you can't possibly be a creative academic if you don't have downtime. So I think there's a little bit of that. We need to reassert that old school thinking of the campus as well. And I do have one more thing I'd like to say with regards to students who might be listening today. Don't let them neuter you. Don't let them bureaucratize you. Don't be bullied into using gender neutral language about yourself as a woman, as a female. Let the people who want to use that language use it, but keep doubling down and asserting that, you are a woman, that you want to be a mother, that mothers have babies, that they breastfeed. For 2 years, I sat on a faculty staff policies committee, and I fought tooth and nail and lost to keep the term mother in our nursing breast milk expression policy. And now it says nursing persons. It's called the nursing persons policy, not the nursing mothers policy. And I actually, in the end, I lobbied for nursing mothers and persons, right? I didn't feel that the word mother had to be eliminated from that. But I think if we don't, Ludwig Wittgenstein basically said that language shapes our reality. And if we want a pro-life, pro-child culture on campus, we have to use the language that reminds people of what a blessing it is to have them there.
Well, thank you both so much. I think that's a good place to conclude and get to the Q&A because it is almost 1 o'clock. Um, so for all of those listening, you can either raise your hand and you can speak your question, or you can throw it in the chat and I can read it. And Alicia, Sarah, whoever feels more comfortable answering, will do it that way. So does anyone have any questions? I'll give you guys a little time, they might be typing. All right, here's our first question.
I think you have to unmute her, maybe, Sarah.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
You okay there, Amy?
It says she's still muted. The red slash on her mic is still showing up.
Yeah, I see that. I'm hitting the here. Yeah, maybe Angela will move on to Dr. Kristen first and see if Amy we can circle back.
She's also getting no, there now. She looks
There
like
you
she's ready.
Dr. Kristen?
Yes, hi, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much for a wonderful wonderful discussion. I'm so intrigued by this Guadalupe project. And here in Rochester, we are just opening Restore Health and Wellness, which is healthcare for the whole family, men, women, and children. And throughout the year, we'll be adding pediatrics and as well as obstetrics, and then a restorative reproductive medicine practice. So I guess I just have a couple of questions. One is, how can we as a medical practice, I'm interested in hearing thoughts about how to maintain just a family friendly environment within the practice. How can we collaborate with maybe a college campus or with young women to provide support? How to support them in their professional development and academic development. And then also with the Guadalupe Project, wow, I wonder if there's a way that our practice could maybe, you know, maybe we could work or collaborate with a local university to make that a reality here in Rochester.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about that?
Alicia, do you maybe want to answer that since you were the one who produced
I
that
do not
comment?
know. I know one professor in the architecture school there who actually writes on the architecture of abortion, which is an interesting topic, and how clinics are designed to, facilitate that. Obviously, she's a pro-life. She has triplets, actually. She became a mother of three, like 5 years into her career. So she's doing it all. She's a good model of that. But I could get in touch with her. I don't know a lot about who's running the project, but I would think it would be something that we could at least start a version of in other places. I don't know if it
I,
would have to be at a Catholic college, or, somewhere like Roberts Wesleyan, but I would think it would be a great, and then you could have, students work at Restore. You could have I would think it would be great for nursing students to, institute this kind of program, especially ones who want to work in obstetrics, be an obstetrician or pediatrics, to have this kind of experience, this pro-family experience.
I have one thought, just thought on the practical issues of providing the medical care, making it the right kind of climate, and that is, I know one challenge that new moms sometimes face is that um, there are postpartum appointments for them, the mom, and there are pediatric appointments for their child, and sometimes treating them instead as the dyad that they are is a way of affirming both of them and making it easier to manage appointments,
Great idea.
rather than when the mother is having her postpartum appointment, it being something where she feels she needs to, for instance, get childcare so that she can go to her appointment. What would it look like if it would be helpful for her baby to be in another room while she has her appointment? What would it look like to actually have a nursery, like a church nursery style, like a little place where someone can hold your baby for 20 minutes while you go into your appointment if you need to be separate from them, but for it to be completely normal that you would be with your baby as a new mom.
Yeah,
that's
great idea.
incredibly helpful. Thank you.
All right. Well, Amy texted me her question actually because she's having technical difficulties. So her comment is would either Dr. Alicia or Dr. Sarah like to comment about the law school student who had to sue Georgetown University simply to have the right to take her exam early? It seems like flexible examinations should be no-brainer. Have you guys seen into these policies?
Well, it's interesting because I actually have an article from the Today Show site about this pregnant Georgetown law student, and you know, so I do want to. I think it's a good. It's proof that Catholic colleges don't have it all together either, because you would think that a place like Georgetown would be so accommodating, and instead she wanted to move her law school examination from the because it was so close to the due date. It was, I think the due date, it says here, was December 2nd, and her in-person final exam was scheduled for December 13th. So about you can't predict when the baby's going to come. And I find it also very hypocritical that all the lip service that campuses pay to, you know, students of color, that as a Black law student, they didn't, see this as high priority, that, the care and concern for her safe delivery of her child. She herself said, in a city, Washington, D.C., with a very high rate of pregnancy related deaths for women of color, she would have thought that they would have done a much better job of that. I don't have any more proof of what kind of policy has been changed as a result of that. But she did say she expressed disappointment in meeting with the university officials. Um, she said here, at the end of my conversation with her, the university official said, "Well, I already told you all of your options. I hope you find one that works." And then she hung up on us, Lovely said. This doesn't feel right, and nobody should have to go through this. Now, can you imagine you're already, anxious about your first baby and gosh knows about, finishing your law school exams and then the institution that's supposed to support you in breaking the glass ceiling and, also emerging through years of law school sane, and therefore, going out into the work world with some kind of, confidence, and having to think about that. I mean, I think it's just proof of everything that Sarah talked about in the earlier part of the webinar.
I'll
Sarah, you
add
want to
some,
comment?
yeah, I just want to add something to that. I think that there's a really interesting challenge here, and that is um, sometimes the solutions are to add rules and policies because the institution's being just totally unreasonable, such as that case. Um, but something that I know is a challenge sometimes is um, if there are a lot of structures put in place, it can actually remove flexibility
Yes,
for
yes,
professors to do what would be most helpful to the student.
that's right.
And so that concern came up recently for us just because there are more rules getting put into place, but that has meant that those of us and my whole department is on the right side of this. Those of us who were already making thoughtful accommodations when we had, for instance, a grad student have a baby, essentially, whatever professor they were a research assistant for would essentially say like, "Hey, I know you're taking care of a baby. Like, I won't ask much of you," right? Very
Right.
informal, um, and very thoughtful and reasonable and personal and humanizing. Um, when that when some bad apples make that no longer an option because some students are having a horrible experience, like the student at Georgetown, um, and then the result is some sort of standardized uniform policy, sometimes it doesn't get us where we need to go. So I don't want us to let go of the personal responsibility that everyone on the campus has to try to just be supportive and accommodating in whatever ways you can. And sometimes that's by taking advantage of good rules that are in place to make sure students get uh, what they should. And other times it might be having to kind of work around some things to try to make sure things are as easy as they can be for them.
Well, Dr. Sarah, one of the things you and I and Sarah P. talked about in our practice session was that a lot of these same changes in attitudes and outlook to develop a fully pro-life, whole life, as Michelle Sterlese wisely calls it, right? Like um, the idea that a whole life culture, a lot of people who might not have children are going to soon be having parents who are elderly and need care. There's a lot of parents who have children with special needs, increasingly more so in the last 20 years in the States, with the rates of autism. And they might be caring for children long past the time that they are actual physical children. And that has a whole set of demands placed on it that a empathetic, pro-life, whole life college campus could do much to ease those burdens rather than make you feel the same anxiety that that student at Georgetown felt. So if you start developing these climates that aren't antinatalists, then you could, as you said, Sarah, flexibly extend that humanizing attitude towards other people who need those accommodations as well.
All right, I'm gonna let the next question in.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, hi,
Okay,
Reed.
great. Thanks so much for really interesting talk. My name is Reed. I'm a student in Professor Hamersma's quantitative analysis class at Syracuse. So I swear I'm not here for 5 extra points. I'm an intern.
I told them no extra credit.
I swear I'm not. So in my own personal experience, I do tend to be on the left, but I do enjoy coming to webinars and talks like this because I do believe in the value of of open discussion in the academic setting. So
Mhm.
I'm wondering in your conception of how campus culture should revert to being a pro-life or go forward to being a pro-life, not revert, but provert, I think, to being a pro-life setting. I tend to be someone who Bill Clinton had the phrase abortion should be safe, legal, and rare.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Do you, I'm curious what your reaction is to that phrasing of abortion, and do you think that that has fallen by the wayside, and how does that square with your view of of what you've articulated today?
Sure. I'm happy to talk about that. And of course we can talk more about it anytime too, Reed. That's so fun that we could have that chance to follow up. Um, I think that I have friends who are really disappointed with the move away from safe, legal, and rare, who
Hmm.
do not feel as comfortable in the pro-choice movement as they used to, because they felt like we all had a sense, there was a collective sense that abortion is not a thing to be celebrated, um, but something that people can vary in what and when they think it's necessary. What I see is for those who have a safe, legal, and rare mentality, we still have a fundamental disagreement, right, about when life begins and when it deserves protection. But I see way more opportunity for collaborating around something like a whole life sort of ethic. If someone agrees that um, women having abortions because they're not financially properly taken care of, or don't have a social support network that's adequate, that women choosing abortion in those situations is a sad thing and not a good thing. That we ought to collectively be able to make it possible for people to feel they have a real choice, where one of the options is to give birth if they would like to. And the example I point to is, and you can look this up if you'd like as well. It's in Syracuse.com. There was an article, probably maybe 2 years ago now, and it was interviewing a woman who runs the abortion clinic in Syracuse. And the article itself, I mean, was very, very clearly coming from the left, as almost all articles are in the media that most of us read. Um, but there was a little a little narration of an experience that this woman had had with someone who came in to get an abortion. And the back and forth. Now, if I had it right in front of me, I would cry while I read it. But since I'm not going to have it quite right, maybe it won't quite hit me as bad. But um, essentially, the it says the woman has had the abortion, and she says she wants to look at um, I don't know what word she used. The journalist used the word tissue. She said she wanted to look at the tissue. I
Hmm.
doubt that was the word that the woman used, but anyway, she said she wanted to look. And so the abortion provider allowed her to look, and the woman um, blows a kiss and says, "I'm so sorry, baby."
Hmm.
Now, to me, even if I were a pro-choice person, I would think that is a terrible story. That is a sad situation. No one should feel so trapped that they know that they're losing their own child, but they're doing it because they don't feel like there's another way. And so I think there's just so much room to collaborate. Um, and I do think this is a tricky thing, and different organizations take totally different approaches to this. So I don't even know that mine is fully aligned with the organization I'm speaking with today. But I really am. I think that there's a lot of room for collaborating around the well-being of women and children and babies, and the ability of women to be able to make choices that they want, including the choice to parent, and not just maintaining an option not to parent, but to actually make it more realistic for women. I feel like that's where we can come together. And of course, over time, I absolutely try to convince anyone who'll talk to me about it that we really need to try to make abortion unthinkable, that it needs to be something that no one would want, that we always
Exactly.
have the ability to take care of the children in our presence, and find a way to make things work for them, so that we aren't losing what they would have brought to the world. Um,
Mhm.
so even with the sort of like baseline disagreement, I think there's a lot of collaboration I can do with someone who believes abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. And it's a collaboration I cannot do with, I would say, like the loudest voices right now in the pro-choice movement, which are much more militant, which are unwilling to think about any grief, for instance, that people might feel, really treating it as a medicalized procedure and an issue only of rights and not one of like complicated, tough moral gray areas, which I think the old Democratic Party was able to consider it to be a challenging gray area in some ways that the current platform doesn't really allow for. Especially with the push lately on really advocating late term abortions, which was never something that would have been happening 20, 30 years ago. We would always say C-sections, always C-sections after viability. There's no question. Everyone agreed on that, but that's really been changing as well.
Mhm.
But I'd love to talk more about it, Reed.
No, yeah. Mhm. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking the question.
Sorry guys, I was muted. We have another question from Karis. Do you want to go next?
Sure. It wasn't even a question. It's actually just to say thank you for this conversation. It's always nice to hear opinions and just hear some of the just things going on. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Karis.
Of course.
Sarah?
Are there any other questions from the audience? Otherwise, I will wrap it up shortly. I know that there was a name on earlier that had a question, but they're not here anymore. So yeah, unless there's anyone else who has a question, I'll just wrap it up. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming to Canceling Female Fertility, How Campus Culture Devalues Women by Devaluing Motherhood. I hope everybody learned a ton. And if you guys have any more questions afterwards, after you've thought about what you heard today, you can email Feminist Choosing Life. You can email info@FCLNY if you have any more questions, and we will find a way for our two amazing panelists, Alisia and Sarah, to get back to you with more thoughts. But yeah, thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Dr. Alisia and Dr. Sarah, for being here today to
Thank
help
you,
us
Karis.
host this amazing event. Do you guys want to say any last things?
Just thank you for attending. We really appreciate it. And come join Feminists Choosing Life of New York.
And thank you so much for the chance to share today. I look forward to more opportunities in the future.
Yeah, we love you, Sarah. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you for being here, Dr. Sarah. Thank you so much, you guys. I'm going to close it out now. Have a great day.
Have a
Thanks,
good day.
Sarah.
Thank you.